Well, we come to the 13th Sunday of the year, and we come across this story of Jairus, who was he was a synagogue official, and not a natural ally of Jesus, but not necessarily an enemy either. And he was he's in a crisis. So let's take a look at this journey of Jairus, and his journey, of course, is our journey. I'm Jairus, you're Jairus. We have crises that come up in our life. We have difficult patches and periods and so on. So let's learn a little bit about this journey of Jairus, and in so doing, we'll learn about our own. At least I pray we will. Now, it starts out with a trial. It simply says that Jesus crossed aside to the other shore, that was last week's gospel, and crowds gathered around him. But then one of the synagogue officials, a man named Jairus, fell at the Lord's feet and said, "Please, come to my daughter. She's at the point of death. Lay your hands on her so that she may get well and live." So he's in a crisis. His daughter has fallen suddenly ill, seems to be dying, is at the point of death, and he runs to Jesus. Good start, and that's always a great start, you see. And it starts out well. Now, I just want to point out that what brings him to Jesus is a trial. And I've noticed in life that sometimes Jesus has fair weather friends and he also has foul weather friends. And what we need is to be an all weather friend, all right? We need to be with Jesus in all seasons, you know. Some people only run to him when there's trouble. Some people are only staying with him when it's all going good. And we need to be with him either way. You see the idea. So he's got his fair weather friends and his foul weather friends, but try to be an all weather friend. All right. Now, this crisis brings him to Jesus. Sometimes it takes that in our life, you know, to make us humble enough to bring us finally to say, "Lord, I need your help," you know. Somewhere along the line when we stop being little kids, we stop running to others like our parents for help, and we start saying, "I got this," you know. And no, we don't. You know, we almost always don't. You know, you can't even cause the next beat of your heart. You know, you and I don't have anything unless God wills it. But again, to live in this relationship, we're in a constant conversation with the Lord, not just in trials, but in all times. But nevertheless, it's sometimes the Lord allows some trials into our life, kind of roughs us up a little, yes, but he permits these things for some greater reason, some greater good that he can draw from it. And one of those sometimes is just to make us more humble. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it sometimes does have to be. So we see that it starts out, Jairus' journey, like yours and mine perhaps, starts out with a trial. We come to realize that we're in trouble and we need the Lord, okay? And this could be the overall journey of our life, or just we're going through a difficult passage. But either way, just note the first salvo in this journey of Jairus is this, that he's having a trial, okay, a test. Now, the next thing that we notice here, though, is there's a kind of a tarrying. You know, I like my alliteration, so we have the T for tarrying or delaying. It says here, Jesus went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. So at one level, he seems to go with him right away. But wait a minute, couldn't Jesus just say, "Okay, I just healed her, she's fine, go home, she'll be fine"? Why? She's at the point of death. Remember, we were told that. Why not just say, "Look, from wherever you are"? Jesus did that in other cases, right? Go home, your daughter will be well, and so on, you know? Why not here? Well, evidently, Jesus thinks there's an importance to having this journey, and he wants to make it with Jairus. And I suppose you've noticed, I certainly have, that the Lord does not seem to be in a big hurry about almost anything. We want him to be in a big hurry about a lot of things, but he's not particularly in a big hurry. And he has his reasons. You know, sometimes he lets us, remain with difficulties or trials for a while so that we grow. Sometimes, again, he's accomplishing something good out of it, maybe using our suffering to help others. Sometimes the Lord is helping us, as I say, to grow in wisdom or to realize that this world isn't all that. It helps us to grow in humility. It helps us to learn gifts that we never knew we had or strengths we never knew we had. And so there's a lot of things that can come from trials that might explain why the Lord doesn't just immediately jump to his feet and solve every problem. If you've ever been a parent, and certainly we've all been children, it's not a healthy thing for a parent to rush and solve every little problem a kid has, Sometimes let the kid work through it a little bit, find out a few things, make their own way. Now, they'll step in at critical moments, but sometimes it's good to let the kid live the question and try to figure it out on his own, Oh, run over and solve the math problem. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? You see? So again, there's a trial. And then the Lord tarries in order to make this journey with Jairus. He wants Jairus to see some things. He wants Jairus to learn a few things. And we're going to see right away he's going to learn a very important lesson. But again, there is this tendency of the Lord, even when we're in trials, to sort of delay or to tarry. Okay. Now, we therefore next come to a third stage of his journey called testimony. And there's a sort of story inside the story of this woman with the hemorrhage. And all these years, she's been struggling, and she spent all her money, and, you know the basic story. And she said, if I can just touch him, just touch his clothes, I can get well. She, after all her suffering, has come to a point where she said, I have the faith, I can touch him, I'll get well, I know I will. And so she does. She comes up behind him and touches the hem of his garment, and she gets well. And Jesus, immediately noticing it, says, who touched me? Now, why is this going on? This is yet another delay. Come on, Rabbi, we got to get on to, these delays. There's a crowd following him. There's also everywhere and around. And then all of a sudden, this woman comes up, and he stops and wants to meet her and talk to her. And wait a minute, don't you hear Jairus' daughter? You see, this is how we're sometimes puzzled by the Lord. But notice there's something important he's trying to say to Jairus here, you see. Look at this woman. All these years she suffered. And she finally has the faith to be healed. And how about you, Jairus? Basically, that's the implied question. And, in our life, in our journey, too, the Lord often sends us witnesses, people who, they're strong in faith and they have testimonies. Or we read stories of biblical figures who are healed or get well or earn the victory. We see these lessons of some of the saints and so on. And we take strength from them, you see. We need these stories, and we need the testimony of others. And others may need your testimony. How's the Lord been good to you? How's he helped you? And so this sort of sidebar isn't really a sidebar. It's the main event that really, in a way, the Lord seems to want Jairus to see. Do you see this woman? See what's happened? How she got well? Come on, let's go see your daughter. Now, there's one other thing I want to say about this woman. There's a very beautiful thing that's pointed out here in the text. It's sort of hiding right in plain sight. Jesus said, who touched my clothes, or who touched me, depending on the translation. And the apostles said, what do you mean who touched you? Oh, it's hundreds of people are in here, and they're bumping up against you. What do you mean who touched you? I didn't say who bumped up against me. I asked who touched me. And you see, that's deeper and richer than just bumping up against the Lord or being physically in the same area with him, right? To touch him in faith. Think a lot about that with the Eucharist and the kind of healing. If we had the faith, we touch Jesus. Do we really know that? And how much do we know that? What does that do for us, you see? It's the touch of faith. It isn't just bumping up against Jesus, okay? Unwittingly or even wittingly, but this is a woman who reaches out in faith and touches Jesus. So are you someone who bumps up against him, or do you touch him? Or do you let him touch you? Good question, right? How's our relationship with the Lord, especially in Holy Communion, maybe making visits to the Blessed Sacrament and so on, right? Okay, so we see that in this journey so far, there's a trial that brought Jairus to Jesus. And Jesus then tarries a bit. He says, well, let's go to your house. He could have healed remotely, but he chooses to make this journey with Jairus. The third stage is testimony. This woman comes up and seems to delay things even more, but is actually a critical part of the story, okay? Now next, though, comes the temptation. You see, after Jesus says to this woman, great is your faith has made you well, comes now for Jairus and for us this temptation. Even if we see testimonies and we see other people being healed, there's also discouragements in life. And so he's immediately says, while Jesus was still speaking with the woman, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer? Okay. Now that is a temptation. Okay. From a worldly point of view, I guess it makes sense. She's dead. There's nothing we can do now. Well, we got Jesus with us. See, now we got a dog in the fight, right? But you get the vision. There is this temptation to just read the worst into everything, to accept bad news instantly and just internalize it. He hasn't even checked all the facts. He simply heard that she's dead. All right. Now, true or not, the point is Jesus is with him. And this Jesus works miracles. Okay? But you see the temptation, right? He can't help you here. Give up. Stop asking. You know? And that was his fault, really. He delayed too much. He could have done it, man. I don't know. He doesn't want to help, maybe, or whatever way you might think yourself into negativity. You see, you and I will do that because that's kind of how our minds are. Any discouraging result, we just sort of catastrophize. Okay, so we get a lot of bad news in life, and but nevertheless, by waiting and calm, you shall be saved. In quiet and in trust, your strength lies. So that's the Lord is saying to Jairus now. I want you to trust me. So this is, if you will, the fifth stage, right? So we started out with a trial. There was then, of course, this tarrying of the Lord. But then there's a testimony. And then comes the temptation. She's dead. Bad news. Catastrophized. It's all over. Don't even bother God anymore. And then the Lord says, have trust. So disregarding the message, Jesus says, that was reported, he said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid. Just have faith. And when they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, with people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, what is this commotion? Why all this weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep. And they ridiculed him, but he put them all out. Okay. Now, notice again, in terms of Jairus, there comes this moment where the Lord calls him to faith, to trust. He says, you do not be afraid. Just have faith. Trust me. I'm leading you somewhere, Jairus. Follow me. He doesn't necessarily say, I'm going to raise her from the dead. He just says, stop. Listen to me. Have faith. Realize that I'm in charge and that I'm going to resolve this. Do you believe this? Do you trust me? Will you follow me? Yes. You see, too often in bad news, some people just give up on God. They just get angry and walk away. Other people just sort of become overly resigned and say, well, God, he just didn't want to. And, and so we stop asking, and we become sort of, just God doesn't really want to help. I'm just meant to suffer, And so we read all this negativity, and the Lord says, stop. Do not be afraid. Just have faith. And he says, keep following me, Jairus. So we come now to the last stage of this journey of Jairus. We started out with a trial. Jesus seems to tarry. Sure enough, they're even interrupted on the journey, but there's a wonderful testimony. And sure enough, though, comes the trial, or the temptation, I should say, that the news is reported that she's dead. Don't bother the teacher. Just send him home. Come on home and let the dead bury their dead. Come on, let's all go bury the dead. And leave Jesus alone. Okay. And then finally, we came to this last one, trust. Jesus says, stop it. Do not be afraid. Just have faith. Well, that then leads, of course, to the triumph. It says simply that he took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered into the room where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha koum, which means, little girl, get up. And everyone was astonished. I love the little detail at the end. Jesus says, now don't tell anybody. What do you mean don't tell anybody? There's a crowd, and you just went in, and the girl comes out alive. It's just, I think sometimes Jesus has to have his tongue in his cheek when he says, no, don't tell anybody. But at the end of the day, it's a magnificent victory, right? He receives his daughter back alive. Now, I know that there are some who, when they hear a story like this, sort of get a little resentful or crestfallen. They say, well, my daughter didn't come back, my mother lost my sister, when she was 30. My sister was 30, and in a fire. Mary Ann didn't come back, But the point is, Mary Ann will come back. In other words, my mother is now deceased too. I pray they've been reunited, And Jesus effects that reconciliation, I should say that reunion, with a mother and her daughter. And my father and my sister too. And I pray God has done that. And if they're still in purgatory, I pray for them there too. But I will say that even if this doesn't happen right now, in the terms of this miracle, if you are faithful and you raise, the people you around, you help them to be faithful, you will be reunited even with those who have died. It will happen. And I know that by faith. And so the Lord says, do not be afraid, just have faith. So again, this is a wonderful journey. It's kind of a picture of life. We sometimes it's trials that bring us to Jesus, but in those trials, he journeys with us. He doesn't just instantly step in and fix everything necessarily, but he journeys with us. There's an old saying I think you've heard before that Jesus didn't just come to get us out of trouble. He also came to get into trouble with us, So there's a little bit of both, Jesus, right? And so again, he journeys with Jairus and gives him a wonderful testimony through this woman, calls him to trust, and comes then finally the triumph, you see. Even after the temptation, leave him alone, the teacher can't help anymore, the girl's dead. Jesus says, cut it out. I'm not just a teacher. I'm the Lord. See, I'm the Lord. And that's, in effect, what we learn today. So a beautiful little picture of discipleship, a certain part of discipleship that especially when there's trials or storms, the kind of faith we're called to have, that even, let's say that, what's the worst thing this world can dish out to you, It'll kill you, Something causes you to die. Well, if you're faithful, maximum promotion, right? You get to go to heaven, maybe through purgatory. But you're on the way, man. Maximum promotion, you see. So the point is that if all things work together for our good for those who love and trust the Lord. Now, it doesn't always seem that way. We don't always understand. There's an old song that goes like this, and I'd like to kind of end with it. It just says this: trials dark on every hand, and we cannot understand all the ways that God would lead us to that blessed promised land. But he guides us with his eye, and we follow till we die, and we'll understand it better by and by. The refrain just says, oh, by and by, when the morning comes, and when all the pains of life have gone away, we'll tell the story of how we've overcome, and we'll understand it better by and by. Maybe not today, but we're going to understand it better by and by. And so today's story is how to deal with trials, make that journey with Jesus through them, and let him work at the pace he will. Sometimes we have to be patient with him because he has things for us to learn. He has his reasons if he seems to delay. Enough said. A great gospel, an important reminder. Do not be afraid. Just have